Wog! Welcome back to the Red Ones Go Faster. I am Old Big Mek. So I have built my channel around telling you how to Warhammer on the cheap and fully legal. Yeah, we got a 3D printer, but we don't really do any of that on the channel. I am all about official GW minis, getting them on the table as cheap as possible so you don't have to spend a lot of teeth to make your warband. And so I've talked about the most cost-efficient army overall, and no surprise, it's Orks. But I wanted to do a follow-up video that's a little bit different because on the Ork one, we specifically talked about new kits and all of the different ways that they can synergize together. Today's video is going to be about used stuff. Simply put, there is a gigantic secondary market for Warhammer miniatures out there. There's eBay, there's Facebook Marketplace, there's your friendly local game store, there's retailers like Mindtaker Miniatures that take in trade-ins and then sell on the secondhand stuff. So there are a million different ways that you can get secondhand Warhammer. And so that's one of the most popular ways to build an army on the cheap. So I thought, what are the 5 cheapest armies you can get secondhand for Warhammer 40,000. Let's get into it. All right, and starting off with number 1, it shouldn't, or I suppose these are reverse order. So number 5, it should be no surprise that one of them is the antagonist from last edition, and that is the Necrons. Now this is going to be obvious because the starter boxes are what give you so much value in Warhammer. They really are the best bang for the buck, so using one of the armies from those boxes is always going to give you one of your best options. So Necrons were the baddies for all of 9th edition, and so because of that, there's a lot of Necron stuff around. Not only do you have all of the starter boxes, many of which are about to go on super duper sale as the new starter boxes for 10th come in, but also you have things like Imperium Magazine. So you have literally oodles of these things out here that for way less cost than the actual kit gave you entire units. And now these are used on the secondary market. They go for even less than that sometimes. So if you wanted to build yourself a Necron dynasty, right now is the time to do it super cheap, because the antagonist that is the just unreleased one is usually the most cheapest, because a bunch of people will have bought those starter sets, maybe held on to the Necron halves going, oh yeah, I'm going to do this as one of my armies. And now the new hotness is out and everyone's going to do Tyranids instead, and they're probably going to be selling off those Necrons for pretty cheap, myself included. Which brings us to number 4, and it should be no surprise, it's the current antagonists. Yes, that's right, the Tyranids. And the reason why I'm going to go with the current antagonists being a little bit cheaper than the just discontinued ones is GW did Leviathan right. We've been over that. There's a million of them out there. You can buy Leviathan halves for pretty cheap. There's already people putting them out, but then also those new starter sets that Games Workshop have done the pre-release on, they look to be an amazing value and super cheap way to get in. So again, you're going to have discount retailers online and stuff like that, people breaking up boxes so that you can buy the used other half cheap. The other thing is Necrons have been the antagonists before. Remember that your friendly Old Big Mek really is old and has been around this hobby for a long time? I remember things like this. Battle for Macragge. It was the starter set for, let me think about this, 5th edition. And it was really, really, really cool. And it came with an entire Tyranid army. In fact, this might be one of the best starter boxes ever made thanks to that lovely terrain, which is what's in this box. But you can see there were Gene Stealers, there were Spore Mines, there were Termagants, there were even like pits that these spore mines would come out of. So you have this kind of complete army. Now what that means is not only were a bunch of these sets out, and again, those halves can be found for cheap, but also a lot of people started Tyranid armies during this time. This was the first time Tyranids really got a glow up since 3rd edition. They got a lot of new plastic kits, and a lot of people got really interested in them. Now those armies have been sitting around for a long time, and people are either going to be picking them up and playing Tyranids again with the new stuff, or more likely, they're looking at all the older stuff, like the sculpts in this kit, and going, it doesn't measure up to the new stuff, and they're going to sell this stuff really, really cheap. So again, if you're doing a secondhand army, look around for stuff like this, because somebody with these old Gene Stealers and Termagants might sell them super duper cheap so that they can put the new Leviathan stuff in their army. And if you don't care about which sculpt you've got, this could be a fantastic option. Shh, don't tell anybody. Orks are number 3. I joke. You know, you guys all know that I think Orks are the best ever, period, and they are definitely the best army to buy new. But on the secondhand market, Orks are number 3 on my top 5 list of secondhand armies to buy. And much like the Tyranids that I just talked about, Orks have also been the antagonist before. They were actually the antagonist in the 2nd edition starter set and the 4th, which was Blackreach. And Blackreach was really awesome. You had really an entire army in there. It was a war boss, 5 knobs, I believe it was 20 boys and 3 Defcopters. And up until the new Defcopters got released in the Combat Patrol, those were the only Defcopters you could get. So those were a little pricey, but that's all changed now that the new ones are out. But basically, you've got a ton of Orks laying around from those sets that could be had really cheap. And you know what? They still hold up today. You get a Blackreach knob, you put them on a 32mm base, and you're done. Not only that, all of the really old Orks stand up. Check out these metal guys from 2nd or 3rd edition, the Tank Busters. This is still the unit loadout used in the 10th edition index. And even though this thing is weighty enough to, you know, cause permanent damage to your opponent if you throw it at them, it is a perfectly legal unit and totally looks right amongst all the new stuff. And of course, much like the Orks and new stuff, their secret sauce is that every kit is an Ork kit. This is all the spares from a Baneblade. Funny ha-has aside, I am serious though. All those old transports that are out there, you get the old Gorka Morka trucks, you get old Rhinos and Chimeras and things like that. You cut the back out of them, you glue an Ork boy on top, and guess what? You got yourself a truck. And it's totally legal and accepted by the community. You expect Orks to steal everybody else's stuff and use it, so it looks right in the army. Having a bunch of looted stuff is like their MO. Finally, there's another part of Orks, and you're going to see this is actually a theme for my top 3 that make them extra cheap on the secondhand market, and that's that you can use old school Warhammer as well. So whether it's old world stuff or Age of Sigmar, they blend right in. You could buy a bunch of old Ork boys from AOS or Warhammer and put modern weapons on them, you know, from your spare parts and whatnot, gubbins them up, and now you have 40k Orks. So it doubles your amount of used stuff available out there. Orks, especially the greenskins, man, they've been made forever and in all the different game systems, and they all really do work well. There are fantastic armies out there made with like Blood Bowl Orks and stuff like that. So you really can, like, sky's the limit as far as infantry stuff goes with the Orks in order to make a used army for really, really cheap. All right, you better be sitting down because now we're into our top 2. And here's where it's going to get controversial, even more so than me now picking Orks as number 1. And that's going to be that number 2 on your cheapest armies to buy secondhand is Space Marines. That's right, your friendly boys in blue or red or yellow, whatever color floats your boat. Most of us are gray plastic, let's be honest. They are the number 2 cheapest army. Now again, that shouldn't come as a shock. The Space Marines are literally the poster boys of Warhammer and have been in every single starter set. You've got them in 10th edition in Leviathan and the new starter sets. You've had them in 9th edition. You had them in 8th edition with Dark Imperium. 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, so on and so forth. And all of them are still legal. You can pick up an old school monopose plastic, Space Marine from the 2nd edition kit, and it's still legal in your army today. Is it going to be the best? No. But it is legal. Now, the Primaris have been made long enough now in between 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th that you can find a lot of good used Primaris units and a lot of good used, units that are strong enough in the game to actually be worth it. But let's be honest here. Most of what you find for really cheap is firstborn stuff, especially the older things as people start upgrading. Some of the newer stuff like the Space Marine Heroes that are molded in the new style and a little bit taller, these are still a little pricey. Again, still pretty cheap used compared to new, but again, the newer the stuff, the better the unit, the more expensive it's going to be. So the really cheap Space Marines are indeed going to be your super old firstborns. And that's why they're number 2. Because number 1 is also Space Marines, just them spiky ones. That's right, Chaos. Chaos Space Marines are my pick for the number 1 cheapest army to buy used in Warhammer 40,000. I'm going to tell you why. Everything I just said about regular Space Marines is true for Chaos Space Marines. All you have to do is glue a spike to them, and they're literally now a Chaos guy. Now, obviously, Chaos doesn't have Primaris and all that stuff, and that's going to cut a lot of that out. But again, as we just talked about, the Primaris stuff is actually kind of expensive on the secondary market compared to your Firstborn Marines. But these Firstborn Marines, these little stubby guys, you get those guys, you glue some spikes and a sword to them, and hey, now you've got Legionnaires. You give them a chain axe, they're a Berserker. You give them a funny looking head, they're a Thousand Sun. All the Firstborn Marines work in Chaos. The other thing that they do, which to me makes it where they're actually above and beyond the Space Marines, is with Space Marines, the vehicles are really expensive. About the only thing you're going to find on the cheap right now are like old school stubby dreads. And like old rhinos and stuff, right? None of the new floaty tanks are going to be cheap. Even Land Raiders aren't cheap. But the vehicles that are cheap, those really old school rhinos, those really old school Predators, are perfect for Chaos. Again, you put all the spiky bits on them, and away you go. There's also like demon engines and stuff, right? You take one of those old stubby dreads, you put a bunch of spikes and tentacles and stuff on it, and now you've got, a Defiler or whatever funky Chaos things are. I don't play Chaos, I don't really know, but you know what I mean. They're out there. And just like with Orks, Chaos has the double entendre of actually coming in Age of Sigmar and Old School Warhammer as well. And a lot of them not only can be used in 40k, but can be used literally identically. All of your little demons and stuff, you can use them in both. Your greater demons, you can use them in both. So all those little, Warhammer Old School and Age of Sigmar and stuff like that, you can use all those guys in your army, and so that's going to make your army, again, bigger and cheaper as you buy in the secondhand market. And again, stuff like, hey, little stubby Terminators that all these guys don't want anymore, you give them some Lightning Claws and nice Chaos Terminator. They were also just the baddies 2 editions ago. You had the Death Guard and the Nurgle guys were the antagonists, and so a lot of this stuff is pretty cheap. Now, some of it has gotten expensive, I will admit. The Dark Imperium half is going for kind of nutty now, but as they release more stuff, like right now you've got the Nurgle, and Death Guard Heroes sets, and things like that, I think you're going to see prices on these come down. And then again, you can use, Age of Sigmar zombies and things like that for these guys. Now, the one caveat I will say about collecting Chaos Space Marines, and this is something that I actually ran into with my little grots, because it was one of the armies they were collecting, is that we figured out that you can't actually use all of them together. So if you do end up with a bunch of Khorne Berserkers and a bunch of Death Guard guys and a bunch of other things, they're different armies, right? They really have separated out. Gone are the days of Chaos Undivided and being able to kind of run everything together. Will they bring it back? Possibly, but probably not. So if you are going to do the Chaos route, I would definitely pick a lane and stick in it. Like if you're going to do Death Guard, then make sure everything you pick up can actually be used for Death Guard. If you're going to do World Eaters, make sure everything you pick up is actually going to be good for World Eaters. If you don't want to have to think about that kind of granularity, then maybe step back to the regular Space Marines and again, just do Firstborn or pick up a bunch of really cheap Primaris and just not really have any vehicles. But those are definitely your top 2 options, thanks to all that power armor. So that's it. That's my thoughts on the 5 cheapest armies to buy secondhand for Warhammer 40,000. Give me a comment down below if you collect any of those or if you know of any good deals on where to find secondhand Warhammer. And if you think I've missed anything, definitely let me know, because I feel pretty in tune with all the different armies, but I'm out of touch as far as the newest, latest, greatest stuff is, obviously considering most of my stuff is ancient, like me. I hope you enjoyed this video and this dive into the world of used Warhammer and building your armies on the cheap from the secondhand market. Hopefully you've learned something today, or it's helped you make a decision on what army is going to be right for you. So until next time, WAG!